Hey guys, it's Illuminostic. It looks like I'm going live. There we go. Okay, I can see myself. Hope everyone's doing well out there. This live stream is at the request of a patron. And I just want to mention to you guys that that is a thing that I do. If you would like a subject discussed in a live stream or a video, my general rate is $1 a minute. And yeah, so you can make a contribution in PayPal or Zelle or cryptocurrency, and I will cover any topic you like. Speaking of that, I have looked at my analytics, and live streams don't really get me any subscribers. I'm demonetized, so I don't have a super chat, so they really don't do anything for me. I'm hoping that my subscribers like them, so maybe it helps to keep my community strong. But battling demonetization and shadow banning, the channel's definitely struggling a bit. So it's really awesome if you guys support us via Cash App or cryptocurrency. And so this is a super, super important subject that we're talking about in this live stream, because I think in the education system in the United States, critical thinking is not really taught. You're taught what to think, but not how to think. And that's not the function of education, in my opinion. I'm pretty sure it's like this in Australia, Europe as well. Definitely indoctrination has taken the front seat. And so, and this live stream, I'm going to give an overview really of what needs to happen in terms of diet, really effective meditation practices, and a few critical thinking exercises that you can do, and just habits that you need to form. That's really the most important thing, is that you sort of instinctively weigh your options and look for alternative explanations for everything that you experience. And this live stream was actually framed, the patron was looking for specifically in terms of someone that's taking up magic or, spiritual practice. And I should be clear that when I talk about magic, I'm not talking about casting spells or summoning demons or any of that sort of stuff. It's just about expanding your consciousness and using plants that alter your consciousness, and ritual magic, which is, just really sophisticated meditation techniques. I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that you will not find yourself connected to predator-human intelligences or something like that, but it seems to me that it's much healthier to think about those things in terms of accessing parts of the mind that we don't normally have access to. And I think that it's fair to consider that we very well might experience that as a dialogue with something that is completely other. It hit me like a freight train a few months ago when I really realized that this dialogue that we have with Pachamama when we drink ayahuasca very well could be just the other hemisphere of our brain communicating with us, and we're just not really used to that. So all that stuff is worth taking into consideration. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is, you really have to take a holistic approach if you want to get the most mileage out of your analytical capacities, out of your perceptual apparatus, right? So personally, I eat a diet that is engineered for optimum brain health. And anything that you can do to support that is tremendously important. Even if you're a person that is sensitive to psychedelics, or, you maybe have a bad reaction, or whatever the case may be, I don't think microdosing is very effective. In fact, like study after study after study has shown that it's no more effective than a placebo. And a lot of people apparently don't know what placebo means because they say, well, it worked for me. Could still be a placebo. It's really not the point. But I do think that threshold dosing is effective, which is where you take just enough that you feel it. It might be reminiscent of a cup of coffee. So you can still use psychedelics in this context and get really what are probably the most important benefits, like enhanced memory, expanded creative capacity, and there's even been evidence that it can raise your IQ. So even for people that are adverse to a psychoactive experience, you can still get brain gains from psychedelic mushrooms, and that works best when you do it in conjunction with niacin and lion's mane. Lion's mane is so effective at building the brain that they're actually using it with success. Caffeine actually is like, it's weird how it is a healthy source of dopamine. Like usually, chemical hits of dopamine are not, they don't sustain, but research on consumption of coffee seems to be an exception, that is actually, equivalent to exercise or something in terms of the dopamine boost that you get. So, the point is that, a diet high in omegas and just generally engineered to support brain health and neuroplasticity and neurogenesis is first and foremost. And then, there's emotional health. You have to deal with your trauma and your self-esteem issues, or you run the risk of doing what I did to myself for most of my life, which is to allow your perception of yourself to make you believe that you're much dumber than you actually are. So it's incredibly important to sort all that stuff out. Your, ability to perceive, analyze, and interpret all sorts of relevant bits of data and experience can be compromised by low self-esteem pretty severely. I mean, it's pretty horrific. It can be really disabling. And I see that a lot. People define themselves based on their limitations, which to an extent is good because actually anything is defined by its limitations, right? If it was just infinite, it would just be a big blob of infinite. It's literally the limitations that define a thing. But you have to have a healthy relationship with that. On the other side of the coin is to develop the objectivity and neutrality to avoid bias and Gallon-Kruger, where you think you're smarter than you are. Before I move on away from emotions, though, fear is the number one intelligence killer. There's actually been studies done on this where they have been able to show that it actually being afraid significantly lowers your IQ. And that, I think, is extremely relevant right now in the current times of uncertainty. There's a lot of chaos. People are generally afraid. And it kind of looks to me like they're all acting a fool out there. So definitely a correlation between fearful and anxiety states and stupidity. And you're going to find that there are associations between all of these things. So if you are able to put your personality and your traumas and all of that stuff under a microscope, get it all sorted out, right? Deal with your self-esteem issues, build yourself up. You're going to have more courage in general, and that's going to make you smarter. So every bit of the process that I'm describing has a domino effect. And so once you start making progress, you're going to see that progress is compounding. And, of course, you guys know about being healthy. We don't really need to talk too much about exercise and whatnot. But we should talk about flow state. This is something that I feel is really underappreciated in our culture in general. I feel like every single person that ever lives should have some kind of musical expression. But particularly instruments that require ambidexterity, so the ability to use both hands at once doing different things. When you're playing guitar, for example, both of your hands have to operate independently of each other doing very different tasks. On top of that, whereas a flute or a saxophone or something is linear, you are thinking about melody, harmony, rhythm, and potentially other things, modality and all this different stuff, depending on your level of ability. And so that nothing. I'm willing to bet that there's literally nothing under the sun that will help you to develop your ability, analytical abilities and just general capacities of consciousness than playing music, particularly in an improvisational state. Because when you look at flow state and then you think about what's happening when your flow state triggers, and then you think about what's happening when you're improvising on an instrument, a lot of the prerequisites for entering into flow state are part of the process. Check the chat. Yeah, and so let's see, flow state. Okay, and then a meditation practice. Your clarity and tranquility is absolutely prerequisite to any kind of meaningful mental exercise. This is something that, again, as a culture, we really undervalue. If you think about if you were to take a guitar and just play it every day and never tune it, it would be a mess pretty fast. And that's basically what you're doing with your brain. It's a muscle and it's an instrument. And, muscles have to train to have habits. I've been playing guitar for decades and decades. And so when I pick one up, I can play all kinds of different scales and chords and stuff without even thinking about it because I have that muscle memory. The brain is the same way, and the habits are the same. And so, yeah, that's an extraordinarily important thing. But I was talking about meditation. So one of the things that I suggest for any person that, particularly if you're starting out working with magic or any, if you're working on shamanism, you want to become an ayahuasca facilitator, which if you're going to do it the traditional way actually requires you to drink ayahuasca when you are taking care of people. And it's not a full dose necessarily, but you have to be able to navigate that. And even to get the maximum benefit from any kind of psychedelic experience, it's necessary that you can maintain focus and concentration and also regulate your emotional state during the experience, especially if you're going to take higher doses in order to get the maximum, to make investitures of your experience, right? To ground them and make something out of them. And so there is a process for meditation that I recommend. Actually, what I recommend the most is to learn the fourfold breath in pranayama and then learn the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Even if you're not interested in magic, it is just such a beautifully designed method of compressing information into symbols, which allows you to process a lot of information very rapidly. In fact, if you don't believe me, I remember a long time ago I made a video about an ayahuasca experience that I had where I was complaining to this ayahuasca spirit that I was sick of all the gibberish, right? All of my visions were just nonsense. I wasn't getting anything from it. And Pachamama said, well, your brain operates in a language of symbols. So just because you're not consciously aware of a communication doesn't mean that one isn't occurring. And I thought that was a brilliant answer. And then the other day, I was watching a video about Savant, and the interviewer noticed that he was like wiggling his fingers around and making shapes when he was asked questions. And this guy would spit out a 16-digit longer. I mean, he could just, I don't remember if it was pi or, whatever, crazy long solutions to these problems. He can do it all in his head, and it's not instant, but close enough. And when they asked him what he was doing, he said that the answer comes in these symbols that he draws and can see with his fingers. And so that is what Pachamama was talking about. And so I thought that was kind of a really validating example of that. Also, in the Western occult tradition, you will encounter magical squares. And I'm not talking about necessarily like the magical square of the sun that has the numbers 1 through 36 arranged so that horizontally they all add to 111 and vertically they all add to 666. It's pretty extraordinary in and of itself, but this is a different thing, like the Nokian tablets. And they look like circuit boards. And, I was thinking about this, like, how do they actually work? Because remember that in my school of thinking, magic is all about changing your consciousness. And I realized that they work in the same way that a PR code works when you scan it with a scanner. It's the same thing. But anyways, symbols are a powerful way to compress information. And so the LBRP, without going into too much detail, is about consciously composing your microcosm that you are a god of every morning, and then banishing all the stuff that doesn't serve you every single night for at least a year. So that's an awesome practice. I guarantee you'll get results, and there are definitely videos about it on my channel, and actually demonstrations on my Patreon, which you should all join, because I don't get any money from YouTube if you guys don't support me. So the meditation techniques that will really help with this process of analysis and observation and all of your other cognitive capacities that you're trying to polish up. There are two different versions of meditation, basically. There are concentration meditations, and then there are passive meditations. So you could say active and passive. In the active type, you might be visualizing a tattva, or, a tattva is like a square with a circle in the middle, and there's certain colors. And in a passive meditation, if you think about the analogy of a rock whizzing by your head, and as it's moving very quickly, you can't tell the composition, you don't know what kind of mineral it is, it's just a blur. But when it runs out of energy and is still, then you can examine it from any angle that you would like, and determine everything about it that you could possibly need to know. And so that's what you're allowing your consciousness to do, to turn to its natural state. Then you can actually see what it is. But the active meditations are kind of neglected. And in this active meditation, best in the morning, because your consciousness is helping you to create your reality throughout the day. So you are visualizing something, doesn't matter what it is. The tattvas are great because they're simple. And if a line changes or the colors flicker or whatever, you have to start over, recompose the image and start over, and hold it as long as you can while, having just regular breath, but even breaths. And that's all there is to it. Do that for 20 minutes when you wake up in the morning to get your brain in a laser focused state. And also don't touch your phone for at least an hour when you wake up. That's really important as well. I don't think I mentioned dopamine precursors as part of the diet to support all this. Earlier when we were talking about diet, it's really important. Fava beans, mucuna, red velvet bean, those are all super good sources of L-dopa, which is a precursor. But at any rate, so do that in the morning. And then at night, the passive meditation, where you're just observing the breath, observing your thoughts, and preparing yourself for sleep and letting go of everything from throughout the day. And if you really are serious about it, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and the fourfold breath. And the fourfold breath is a little bit more sophisticated, but still pretty easy. But this is extremely good for creating habits. In fact, I used an hour or so of, and mucuna actually contains trace amounts of DMT as well. I used this for an hour and a half, 2 hours to deprogram a smoking habit with 100 micrograms of LSD. And I had smoked for, I think, at least 20 years, and an hour or two of this pranayama with the LSD, and I forgot that I was a cigarette smoker the next day. I didn't remember until I put my hand in my pocket and found my tobacco. So extremely powerful, even without LSD. And the reason is that when you're inhaling and holding the oxygen in, you're inundating and flooding the brain with the fuel that it needs to repattern and recondition, right? And when you are exhaling and holding the breath out, that deprivation accelerates your accessing altered states. And so this combination of breathing in for 4 count, holding for 4 count, breathing out for a 4 count, holding it distended for a 4 count, while focusing on the new habit or pattern when you're holding the breath in and while you're breathing in. And I generally don't think about anything specific on the exhale, but just letting go of negative feelings as you're exhaling. And so that is generally done. The fourfold breath is usually done by any magician right before a ritual work. So it's common that you will assume the form of the Kabbalistic cross and start doing the fourfold breath. And you imagine yourself expanding and expanding and expanding until you have merged with the Godhead. But yeah, so that's generally preparation for ritual and an excellent way to reprogram your mind. So let's talk a little bit about the process of finding the clarity to really embark on, I guess, magical practice. I increasingly hate using that term because I feel like it's got so much stigma and just gives people the wrong idea. But you guys know what I mean. The expanding your consciousness and increasing your capacity for all kinds of thought really is what's happening. Depoliticize. This is enormously important. Your political indoctrination is clouding your view of reality, right? So this process, and this is partly from observation, watching other people go through this process, it's pretty predictable, the order that people go through. You start, Crowley's book 4 is a good place to start. But usually it's the politics that people see through first. And if that's not happening organically, you can induction, you can seek induction of depoliticization. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but probably the best way to start to free yourself from political indoctrination is to look around you. Where did you grow up? What characteristics does your demographic have? Like if you live in the Deep South and you're a Republican, and this is bringing us to our next area of deprogramming religion, you must get rid of religion. There is no bigger mind killer than religion. If you're religious, you need help, and there is help, luckily. But that's the next one, and that one is so difficult. I watch people struggle with this for years and years and years, and you might say, what does that have to do with critical thinking? And luckily I have an answer. If you have to think about the fundamentals, like what is your fundamental base structure of ontology? Where do your beliefs and perceptions originate? And the religion is really the core thing. So if you're an atheist, for example, that can limit your ability to perceive the universal mind at work. If you absolutely believe that there is no intelligence integrated into the fabric of the universe even, then you will miss out on synchronicities, and you will have, it's a very limiting belief system. To be at least agnostic is absolutely essential to have the kind of objectivity that's needed to have an authentic experience of the universe. It's facts. I don't know if I really need to go into the political thing too much before we move on to religion, except to say that a very useful practice is to try to see the world through the eyes of people on the other side of the aisle. Just make believe, make it a thought game, and try. If you're alone, a lot of people have their kids do that kind of dialectic at dinner, where somebody will choose one perspective and people on the other side will argue from their point of view. Aleister Crowley described this as meeting every idea with its opposite. So not just in the political arena, but in every situation that you can develop the habit every single time you think of something to present the opposite and then try to combine them. That's actually what dialectic reasoning is. And it's also the alchemical process of combining two things. And if it's done right, then a third thing of a higher nature will emerge. If you're just dialing in, please hit the like button. So yes, combining opposite ideas is extremely important. And now let's talk a little bit about religion and how it occults even genuine spiritual experience. It's my belief that all of the institutionalized religions are designed to intercede on the behalf of the ruling class. So they actually inhibit spiritual experience of an authentic nature. all of them. Even Buddhism, which people generally kind of, it has a pass. And I will admit that it's generally less restrictive and damaging than other religions, but it is institutionalized. And the kind of message that sit down, shut up, don't want anything, don't be attached to anything, be passive, don't fight. You know what I mean? It's a little bit sus. I'm just saying it's not. Also, the fixation of suffering, I don't know that that's necessarily super healthy either. So all of the institutionalized religions, and here's the thing. If you have to ignore reason and logic and good sense and evidence in order to maintain a belief system, that is going to transfer into all of the other areas of your perception. So this is why it's so damaging. This is why people that believe the earth is flat, despite the fact that you can make observations with the naked eye, the ability to ignore obvious evidence is sort of integrated into our perceptual apparatus by religion. And it happens so early that it becomes so fundamental to engage in selective perception, to maintain cognitive dissonance in order to protect these beliefs that would just go up in smoke if a little bit of light hit them, because they're, so obviously not real. And even people that are not religious, that come from these cultures, generally don't realize how badly they've been affected by this. A lot of people that are not Christian are unwilling to entertain even the idea that Jesus wasn't even a real person, despite the fact that there's not one shred of evidence anywhere in the world. The most damning thing is that the Romans kept really anal records of everything that happened. So if there was a guy walking around preaching, gathering big crowds, if there had been a crucifixion of said guy, if there had been a trial, there would be records of all this stuff. And we have records from that period. There's not a shred of evidence or references to anyone fitting that description. And despite all that, people will still try to insist that, oh no, I think he was a real person. Even though if you analyze it further, you can see that, let's see, Jesus walking on water was just light dancing on the water. Light reflects on water. The sun spends 3 days on the Southern Cross, 3 days in the grave. The sun dies and resurrects every day. Kind of seems like... And then it gets worse, of course, because you can trace earlier myths and you can see what the composition of the myth is from. And also the evidence that the Roman consulate actually created the religion in order to create pacifists and sheep. The fact that his ministry followed the campaign trail of Titus is pretty damning as well. The Roman consulate created the religion in order to pacify the pagans and to control the tribes in present-day Palestine. That's all it is. That's it. And, I've just noticed having this conversation with people that they will say, well, I disagree, and I say, why? Present all that evidence, and they'll say, well, I just feel like that's crazy. Believing a feeling over mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence is literally insanity. So, that's brings us to our next subject, or our next chapter in this subject, which is objectivity and neutrality, right? You cannot be attached to ideas. You have to have the courage to let go of even your most treasured beliefs. This is a very challenging thing for a lot of people, but you have to be willing to neutralize the wish demons. You have to be willing to shine light in every crack, crevice, canyon. I always ask the medicine when we drink ayahuasca to shine the light where we're unwilling or unable to look ourselves. And boy, does it ever. By the way, you guys, we still have a couple spots open for the October retreat. It's amazing down here, and it's the last one for sure because I'm going to Egypt to drink ayahuasca in the King's Chamber. My friend is renting it for 2 hours. And so I get an hour in there, and I'm going to drink ayahuasca and lay in the sarcophagus, which is almost, I'm a little bit intimidated even by that idea, but I'm definitely going to do it. But yeah, so this objectivity, wish demons are beliefs that we cling to, even oftentimes well past when they no longer serve us, or they've been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to be incorrect. And this can also apply to the shadow self and parts of the shadow self that don't need to be integrated. They need to be dissolved completely. You know what I mean? You don't need to integrate the entire shadow. Some of the shit just needs to go. It's sandbags on your balloon. You need to cut the ropes, forget about it. There are people that you need to do that to as well. But yeah, so you have to develop objectivity and neutrality. And there are lots of ways to do that. Ego dissolution is not something that I recommend. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of pop culture spirituality. Terrence McKenna said this as well. You don't want to dissolve the ego, but you want to develop a healthy relationship with it. It's what gives you definition, and it's really important. In fact, in the Western occult tradition, one of the ideas is that you have to define your ego as clearly as possible. This is the old maxim, know thyself, that every brilliant thinker, from ancient Greece to the current day has said, people say now you have to find your higher self. You have to connect with the holy guardian angel, your higher self. There are all these different words for it. But that is of absolute primary importance. You have to know your objective. You have to know what your goal is. You have to know what you're working towards. You have to develop the ability to analyze that objectively, however, and this is the hardest thing for people. If you genuinely believe that you're going to be a rock star, but you suck at music, you're not going to work hard on it, as well as you should, and it's never going to happen. A person may go study medicine when he was really a painter, in which case he will be unhappy and unsuccessful as a doctor. You must determine your purpose in this universe. And I really do believe that everyone has some fundamental purpose. The universe does not waste energy. It does not create things it doesn't need. It doesn't create things that have no purpose. Everything has some sort of fundamental function, and that includes people. Everyone has a purpose here. I'm lucky enough to have had a clear picture of why I was here and what I felt like I needed to do since I was a toddler or something. I mean, as long as I can remember. But, I understand that a lot of people don't. I'm always surprised when I hear that. People are like, I don't know what I'm doing here. You have to find out. And you can use psychedelics to do that. You can use meditation to do that. You can use developing metacognition skills, which are extremely important. That's really the dictate of know thyself, is to develop metacognition. And again, that objectivity and neutrality, the healthy relationship with ego is the primary thing of importance when you are learning to regulate wish demons. And the danger here, really, and this is extremely common, almost everyone does this, especially men. If you succeed in piercing the veil, if you elevate your consciousness, if you have experiences of telepathy and precognition, the reality is that those experiences are more or less automatic, and they're probably, not telepathy, but precognition is probably just the result of the subconscious mind processing patterns and extending those patterns, or observing mapping patterns. Pattern recognition, massively important. So pattern recognition, extending those patterns out into the future, and then you have accurate predictions about what's going to happen. You can gather enough information about a system oftentimes that you can predict its behavior. That's how you know that you actually know a system. That's why when I talk about the government, you guys should probably listen, because I have been able to predict their behavior consistently for years. It's all on my YouTube channel. So metacognition, self-awareness, But when you start to develop those skills, oftentimes you will imagine that you are having, once you believe, and this is why belief in psychic abilities and magic and all that stuff is so dangerous, because most people have ego, and if they see any evidence at all that it's actually happening, once, they will start to project it where it's not actually happening. People will believe that they're having precognitions when they're just hopes, and that can lead to terrible mess. You definitely have to develop objectivity, and you have to be willing to test these things. I know people that believe that they're accessing the Akashic record, and they very well may be. I think it's very possible that something like that exists. But usually what you'll find is that people are too attached to these ideas to actually try to test it and see if they can find any proofs. And so you have to be willing to actually do that. The only time that I take seriously information that I have received from a voice in my head or from a plant spirit when I drink ayahuasca, and I don't even think that's what they are, but I do think about them that way because that's how it presents, and it's just easiest to do that. So, but the only time I take that kind of information seriously is when I actually have a way to test it and verify it. Otherwise, it doesn't really do you any good, Yeah. So, for example, and this is a crazy one. I don't know if we're going to be able to actually test this or not, but a friend of mine that has been to the pyramids said that he noticed there are all these like false doorways and places where it doesn't go anywhere. And he conjectured that they are portals to higher dimensions. So there is a very similar thing here in Peru. I'm in Ecuador, but in Peru nearby, where there are doorways that don't go anywhere. And the shamans say that you use a vibration in order to open them up. And it occurred to me that I read about the Grateful Dead going to Egypt, and they went into these chambers and they made sounds, and they said that there were overtones that they had never heard before and were just extraordinary. And then it hit me that if this idea is true, if we go in there and create the right overtones, that would open those doors if that's what they actually are. That could be the secret to the pyramid. And, in this channel, I really try to give you guys information that you're not going to find anywhere else. And what I'm about to tell you is one of the most powerful pieces of information you will ever get. In fact, I'm going to tell you two things that really demonstrate how the universal mind works and how to read the universe like an adept or a shaman. And so there's a pretty widely known fact, and it's not misinformation. It is actually true. I don't know whether it's the latitude or longitude, one of the two. The tip of, if the capstone of the pyramid actually was there, the coordinates were the exact speed of light. And so people rightly point out that the Egyptians did not use that system then, not to record the speed of light or latitude and longitude. So they dismiss it. But here's a key piece of evidence to consider. The mysteries that were studied in the halls of Amenti or in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, light is the fundamental, I don't want to say secret, but it's all about light. Because, the ancients knew, any real initiate knows that light is the source of our consciousness. There's really no other answer. It's not even hard to figure out that our consciousness comes from light, because there are only two things in the universe, void and light, because matter is light in a standing wave. So there's literally nothing but void and light here. That's it. So if you consider that this pyramid has this coordinate that is, exactly the speed of light, and the mysteries were focused around light that were practiced in that pyramid, and you try to write it off, it's brain dead, right? But the materialist thinker is limited by his ontology, right? He can't think beyond certain parameters. So the real answer is that there is some kind of universal mind, and that everything in the universe is structured around the blueprints that have been dictated by this universal mind. It is the same with the 1111 glyph. If you look at 1111, it is symmetrical, right? And I was looking at isomorphs. Actually, I'm going to do a video on this paper by Robert Anton Wilson where he tries to explain synchronicity on a physical basis. And it was really awesome to find because I had the same idea about it. And Robert Anton Wilson was one of the great geniuses of human history. So it was a little bit validating, I guess, to see that he had kind of extended my thinking. And, you know, he had much more knowledge of science than I do. So he was able to make a much more technical expression of it. But that was his theory basically as well, that there's a higher level of symmetry that extends in space and time. And so when you experience a synchronicity, it's because the internal and external universes are in homeostasis. There is a symmetry of a higher order that you're perceiving. And so on a physical level, that's what causes synchronicity, because there's nothing from a higher dimension or a higher power or anything that can just magically make something happen. Everything in the universe is bound by the laws of creation, and nothing is able to change that, not for a moment. So there's that. And then another one that I will share with you. I mentioned this in a recent live stream. But it's also very powerful, sort of like the pyramid thing. Mercury was the metal, along with lead, that was used to transmute into gold in the old alchemical treatises, right? Well, it turns out that mercury is one proton away from gold. So if you knock a proton off of mercury, it becomes gold. So if you're going to transmute a substance out of all of the, thank you, Shamsa. Oh, I wanted to actually thank a couple of new patrons as well. I really appreciate it when you guys join the Patreon, and that's where I really drop the secrets. Just a moment. I'm going to look and see where. Thanks to 85 Juno, Diego, Jonah, Charlie. I'm not sure if I already thanked you or not, but yeah, at least two more patrons, and we really appreciate it because we're demonetized and shadow banned. And by the way, some of you guys have been challenging like the shadow ban being real. I uploaded a video to this channel that got 10,000 views in the same amount of time. I uploaded the same hashtag, same video to a channel in someone else's name, and it got 127,000 views. And it actually hurts it if the same video is already on YouTube. So there's a bunch of other stuff too. Tomorrow at 1:00 p.m., I'm going to go into detail about how, for those that are curious, I've analyzed my analytics and stuff, and you can see how bad the shadow ban is. Yeah, so it's really difficult for me to justify doing this channel sometimes, so I really appreciate it if you guys support us via the options in the chat. Okay, so mercury into gold, right? When I was in high school, the teacher said, not possible. You can't transmute element into another element. But I read maybe 10, 15 years ago that they had actually done that in a laboratory, and the process involves basically magnetism and electricity. Well, guess what it says in... I have the book like physically around here somewhere. This old Masonic book that I have, he describes how you need mercury and electricity and magnetism to turn mercury into gold. If you still think they weren't doing that back then, there's something wrong with your brain. You know what I mean? There's no way. Like, why would they know that mercury was one proton away? Obviously they did, because that's what they were using. And they actually mention in these books, electricity and magnetism. But then think on an even grander scale. Mercury is right next to the sun, and the sun is the physical symbol for gold. So that's another example of the evidence, I guess, that we are connected to what Jung called collective unconscious. But it's not just a repository of human knowledge. It seems that there is structural knowledge, basically, fundamental stuff, the secrets, great secrets of the universe and the universal mind trickle through the adepts and initiates and shamans and mystics. And the difficulty is that once people realize, back to the topic of wish demons, that it's possible to do that, they start thinking that all kinds of bullshit that they're thinking is prophecy. And the ego takes over and starts writing the script, and the universal mind is now silent. And the connection, the actual authentic connection has been lost. Again, I don't think you should get rid of the ego, but you definitely have to develop a different type of relationship with it in order to subordinate it at the proper moments. And, stay in your lane, bro, that kind of thing. You got to make sure it stays in its lane. So, see, I've been talking for 45 minutes. Let me see here. We talked about diet. We talked about meditation. And of course, the obvious thing is to constantly feed yourself new information, study subjects. Don't be intellectually lazy, but study subjects that you don't know anything about and that are very different from each other, and do it deliberately. Something I've been doing for myself lately is to actually start learning higher mathematics, because when I was in school, I didn't care about school at all. I was totally determined to educate myself, luckily. So, I was always reading huge piles of books, but they were books by Huxley and, people like that, McKenna and Leary and Joyce and whatever, but not, schoolwork. I didn't do anything. But I never learned pre-algebra even, or algebra, or trigonometry, or calculus, or any of that stuff. And as an adult, I realized that I may have rebelled a little bit too much, because now I actually want to know how the universe works on every possible level. And I also know that understanding differential calculus is going to inform the way my brain operates, so that I will be allowed to make connections that I'm not going to make if I haven't created that precedent of understanding trigonometry. You know what I mean? Everything is connected. So everything you feed into your biocomputer is going to inform all of the other parts and pieces. So the first thing is that you must establish clarity. You must establish emotional health, tranquility, clarity, and good mental habits. You need to learn to do psychoanalysis on yourself. You have to have good metacognition. You have to analyze your own behavior and the relationships between your dreams and desires and your habits. Because if there is not the proper correlation, ne'er the twain shall meet. Right? Your shit is doomed if you don't connect the dots properly. So let's see. Diet, meditation. I guess we were talking about actual intellectual research. Studying different systems and not being intellectually lazy. That's where we were. That's the hardest thing for people, because you think of, what's the word? Tedious learning is, something that repels a lot of people, but you shouldn't see it that way. This is where an attitude shift is, extremely important. If that's how you feel, it should actually be a joy to see the intricacies and the patterns that emerge from new types of learning, and to develop your confidence and your to obliterate your self-esteem issues. Nothing is more powerful than acquiring a skill or a level of understanding that you didn't think was available to you. And the reality is that you're probably a lot smarter than you think you are, potentially, right? Functionally and potentially are two different things. You can be smarter than you think you are, but then you can have configured your habits and your biases to actually influence you to act like you're dumber than you actually are. So you have to get these things into homeostasis, or you're not going to be able to realize the highest expression of your potential. And that's really what life is about. It's about acquiring the level of responsibility that allows you to have absolute freedom. Bob Dylan, one of my favorite quotes of all time, is that a man is successful, a man or woman is successful when they can do whatever they want with every moment when they wake up in the morning. And that, I think that's absolutely true. And that should be the objective, I think, of any sane person. But in order to get there, you have to be able to claim rights to it righteously. You know, you have to make sure that you are deserving of that, that you are capable of receiving that level of freedom. Because you still need to be productive. You still should, hopefully, want to make a positive contribution to your community or your, you know, the human race, you know, on some level. So acquiring that sense of responsibility that's not dictated to you by religion. That's one of the scariest things that I see when people, I make a lot of anti-religion videos, and people will say, well, without religion, how are people supposed to know what right and wrong is? You know, I have dogs that know right from wrong. Pretty sure they don't believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? That kind of thinking is just so, it is literally the watchword of slaves. You know, this is a slogan of slaves. People that are so successfully indoctrinated that they're not actually capable of thought. That's what religion does to people, particularly Christianity and Islam. Those are the two biggest intelligence killers on the planet, really, with fear in third place. But you know what I mean? There is, in my experience, an objective morality that comes from spiritual practice, from developing the intellect, from what I call gnosis. People that have these experiences tend to become better people in general. And so with the acquisition of freedom and responsibility, you will have peace of mind. And once the water is calm, then you can create works of literal genius. And it is not until you have extricated yourself from all forms of mental and physical and wage slavery that you're really going to have peace of mind. You know, all of the gurus on the internet, all of the self-help people that tell you anything different are full of shit. That's what you have to do. You have to extricate yourself from servitude of any kind. You have to transcend fear. And then once you have acquired those circumstances, then you can truly begin to create. And, you know, the world needs nothing more right now than an army of truly free-thinking people that are not bound to the influence of political doctrines, that are not bound to the influence of social doctrines and social conformity, herd conformity, and that are not lost in religious ideation. That is the liberation of the individual with the aim of eventually ameliorating the human race. This is the great revolution prepared by the ages that is beginning to march. And it is literally the reason why they are putting so much energy into suppressing Illuminastics content on YouTube and, you know, scaring the hell out of everyone and creating all of this social unrest They're shaking the ant farm because the ants won't attack each other. Systems tend towards homeostasis. And so if you look around in culture and our society and you see increasing chaos, it's because someone's shaking the ant farm. That doesn't happen naturally. All systems in the universe are subjected to the same rule of the same laws. There are no exceptions. Physical and non-physical systems all are directed by the same set of laws and rules. And so when something acts unnaturally, you can be assured that there is some kind of free will agent influencing it. And so you get what we have here today. Have I missed anything that is truly essential to the subject? I'm absolutely positive that I have. But yeah, the conditioning, again, I'll reiterate this one more time because these things are all connected, right? So if you have problems with intellectual laziness, you have to counteract that by changing your perception. And the best way to write new programs is breath work with moderate doses of psychedelics. 100 micrograms, some people it may be 60. You don't want to take enough that you're like confused, obviously, and overwhelmed. You need to be able to focus, but you need to take enough to increase neuroplasticity and or to enhance neuroplasticity and increase neurogenesis while doing pranayama. And then you can reprogram consciously. You can write your own programs. And it seems interesting to me that, we know that you can't run a program intended for a Commodore 64, an old 1980s computer on a Mac. You have to upgrade your hardware. So here we are with these psychedelic compounds that literally expose us to higher dimensions where, the line between politics and spirituality getting blurred. It's always been that way, though. I think the reality may be that we're just more aware of it, which is very powerful, actually, that people see. They should not go hand in hand. But really, fundamentally, politics just shouldn't exist. And that's an even better solution. People have to develop their autonomy, and they have to, people have to become autonomous. And that's, why I promote the pursuit of higher consciousness with every breath and every act. I try to, because the reality is that people that are self-aware and that have raised their consciousness to a certain degree do not need to be governed, and they will not tolerate being governed. And we are not going to have a healthy planet where every person is able to reach their highest potential until we are autonomous. As long as there is a sense of hierarchy, we are doomed. And that's another reason why I'm always speaking out against the hierarchical religions. The idea that there's some higher consciousness that is so far superior to you and so removed from humanity that only certain people receive messages. And if you do, then you have to do exactly what it says. Even if what it says is that you have to poison all of your followers or kill your whole family. You know what I mean? Like just the idea of hierarchical religion has made us more susceptible to atrocities. Just the belief that there can be some voice in your head that can dictate things to you that you absolutely have to do. This is one of the most difficult things. You have to extricate yourself from feeling of obligation to your parents to believe what they told you to believe, right? A lot of people are so indoctrinated into their political beliefs political beliefs, and the respect for their father. You know what I mean? And that condition comes from the Judeo-Christian stuff about honoring and respecting your parents. And the reality is, you don't need to honor and respect your president if he's a piece of shit. You need to be objective and to be able to say, dude's a piece of shit. We need to do something about this. If your mother was insane, as was the case with me, you have to be able to see through the fact that it's your mom and be objective and say this person is insane, and then begin the process of neutralizing their influence over you. The same thing with your family's political indoctrination. So this objectivity is absolutely essential for freeing ourselves from the slave mind state that is deliberately cultivated pretty much everywhere in the world nowadays. We have to create an entirely new paradigm. And the problem with creating a new paradigm is that when you come into conflict, like, people will often argue that something is okay because it's normalized. That doesn't make any sense at all. Just because you find something familiar and normal in your culture doesn't mean that it's good or right at all. It doesn't even imply that. Legality doesn't imply morality. Illegality doesn't have anything to do with morality oftentimes, unfortunately. And in order to heal ourselves collectively and individually, we have to develop the objectivity to transcend these culture-bound traps that we find ourselves cornered by. You have to be able to be objective about your perception of your parents in order to heal your trauma and to negate their influence where it is necessary. The same thing with government and politics. And, as I said at the beginning of the stream, one of the best ways to start out doing that is to just look around you. What is your demographic? Where are you? And if your beliefs, this always killed me when I was in high school. Like, how is it that all of these kids don't realize, not in high school, even elementary school, I think the first time I had this argument with a girl on the playground, I was probably in second or third grade, now that I think about it. But, I was just like, if you guys were from India, you'd be Hindu or something. It's got nothing to do. Like, how can you not know that? It just blew my mind that people could somehow overlook the fact that their religion was determined by their culture. It doesn't make it true. And so, that's kind of an extreme and obvious example, but you have to develop the objectivity to go through your belief systems and analyze your perception and extricate yourselves from it just by, where did I grow up? Is everyone conservative Christian there? Well, I'm probably a conservative Christian just because I was surrounded by it. So what is actually true? And then you have to begin questioning everything step by step, piece by piece. And this is why it is essential to develop dialectical skills, read some Hegel. Dialectic is just two opposing opinions, and then you try to combine and analyze and see what remains after that process. It takes some, skills to develop ability, just like anything else. Also, your expectations shouldn't be too high. You have to set reasonable expectations. People oftentimes, I think, become atheists or think that, magic is just totally fake because they try to do it and they try to do something impossible and they fail because of course they did. Or they ask God to do something impossible or even just too improbable, too difficult. That's not how it works. The only way to actually do anything is to learn the rules and laws of the universe and use that knowledge to elevate yourself above circumstance. You're never going to do anything impossible. Magic really is just the ability to analyze and interpret consciousness and the laws of the universe so that you understand the patterns and the potentials so well that to the profane, it appears that you are transcending the rule of law, but that's not possible. Oh, what is my honest opinion of RFK's Jr.'s most recent remarks about COVID and the Jews? I didn't really see that, but I haven't really looked at it. I'm aware of it, but it. Actually, I did look into it to the extent that I verified that the study that he was referencing actually was true, and you know, as a person that has spent a good portion of my life studying Jewish mysticism and the Kabbalah, I'd be hard pressed to call me anti-Semitic, but it's definitely true that there are some very powerful Jews in the world. A lot of anti-Semitic people will point out that Hollywood is controlled by Jewish people and a lot of the banks are controlled, and that's not anti-Semitic. It's just true. So if it's true that a certain circumstance was engineered, it could be possible that the people that paid to have it engineered precluded their genetic group from being infected by it. I don't see any reason not to believe that. And as far as I can tell, the study that he cited was real. And it wasn't like a racist study. It was just, they were just studying COVID. And one of the things that they noticed is that there was an odd circumstance that people with certain genetic dispositions are not susceptible to it, or less susceptible. So I probably just hurt this stream even by saying that name. I kind of wish I had just ignored that question, because it's true that they just, they bury your stuff for talking about certain things pretty badly. By the way, you guys, I haven't asked in a while. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Support me on Patreon, where you can join our secret streams where it really gets deep. We've been analyzing a formerly secret Masonic book for months now, and we're almost done with degree 28 of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And if you have been there for that, you basically know some pretty high-level Masonic secrets at this point. And it's really obvious, that it's, people have been pretty happy with that series. I don't know what you mean by, are you a dialectic? It's not a thing. I can't be a dialectic. Dialectic is a type of reasoning, unless there's some group or something that is a dialectic that I'm unaware of. Being aware of cultural conditioning. And again, to take this back to critical thinking, because that was the original thing, you have to realize that you have to do all this other stuff before your cognitive skills are going to be even. You have to extricate yourself from limiting beliefs. They weren't dialectic. It's just a discourse. There's no Marx and Hegel were not dialectic. They used dialectical reasoning, which is where you combine opposite ideas and try to extricate other stuff from that process. I don't know what that means. Where was I? That's much more fundamental to thinking than people realize. If you go back through history, even what we're taught in public schools, there is a lot of stuff that you'll suddenly realize if you just think through the story. It doesn't make any sense at all. Like the story of the Revolutionary War in the United States. It's obviously not what happened. And it doesn't take much reasoning at all. That's why they teach it to you when you're a very small child. You don't care, and you're never going to think about it again. But what happens is that poor logic and poor reasoning is kind of imprinted. A precedent is set in the mind that is repeated throughout life until the original imprint is corrected. There was a study done where they showed how these associations work. Absolutely horrific what they did, but they took a baby and they brought like fluffy stuffed animal in and then scared the shit out of the kid until the kid was terrified of stuffed animals. And then they brought similar objects into the room to see if the kid was also afraid of those. And so there are all these associations that once this one imprint is made, all associated things, that imprint is applied to them. And so once you have bad conditioning in your early childhood in terms of logic and reason, that is going to be replicated throughout your life in different situations. By the way, I called this unlocking your genius, and I don't think I mentioned this, but I want to be clear that I'm not kidding about that. I personally don't believe that genius is dictated necessarily by IQ. In fact, there are people that are like Rain Man that have one skill. Autistic people a lot of times are, super good at one thing to the point of like genius and can't do anything else at all. And that may be an extreme case, but also people get hit on the head and suddenly they're geniuses. People in a couple of clinical studies took LSD once and they were geniuses permanently afterwards. It's only happened twice, but it did happen. So my theory is that we are like antennas, and our awareness is limited by what Aldous Huxley called, he referred to it as a reduction valve. And, the universe, there's fucking insane amount of signals coming in that could be potentially perceptible. By the way, a crazy thing about AI is that it's going to be able to perceive the full spectrum of light, and it's going to have senses that we don't have. So if there are beings and stuff roaming around in the universe that are not perceptible to us, it will be perceptible to AI. It's really not yet, but there are 7 stages of artificial intelligence development, and we are at like Wetiko? No, I don't think I've heard that. We're at like stage 3 out of 7, I think. And the ability to perceive the full spectrum of everything is like 5. So we're almost there. It's going to be really crazy to see the impact that AI has. That's another thing that we really need to watch out for. Speaking of intellectual laziness, it is absolutely essential if you want to survive what's coming, to learn to use AI. Unless you have some kind of skill that can't be performed by robots, you need to avail yourself of that. But I think we've even let Google start doing too much of our thinking for us. It's amazing to have access to all of this information at our fingertips. But I saw a rapper getting interviewed recently, and maybe he's not the best example, but any adult person should know it was something like, what is 36 minus 6 or something, or what is 6 times 6? And he had to pull out his phone. I mean, it was one of the dumbest goddamn things I've ever seen in my life. But, there's some advantages to that if you are a person that is intent on developing your consciousness and increasing your intelligence. There are a lot of people that are just going to be, that guy. Yeah, all right. So where was I at with this? I got to try to rewind my brain a little bit. It's just all the obvious stuff. If you can convince yourself to work on your mathematical understanding in your free time. Oh, I was talking about genius. Yeah, that's what happened. I got derailed by AI. I was talking about genius. Genius, this is something that's kind of extraordinary because people know a lot of things intuitively that they ignore. We say whiz kid or wizard, right? When someone is super smart. But most people don't even know that the actual objective of the Western mystery tradition is to access your genius. That's what all the rituals and practices and consumption of weird plants and philosophers, the elixir of the wise and all this stuff. It's about accessing genius. Wizard. That's what a wizard does. And in my experience, it is true. It may be intermittent, you're going to get the gates open, so to speak, and have moments of inspiration. But you also can acquire skills, I think, far exceeding your reasonable expectations relative to like your birth IQ. If you actually use entheogens and meditation and traditional learning, developing cognition in that way is indispensable and pretty roundly ignored because people want a magic pill. People want easy answers. They don't want to be told that you need to do a bunch of hard work. That's one of the reasons I really don't like channeling. If we need to know something, it's going to come through. But I see a lot of people think they're channeling or gaining access to the Akashic record, and then they're completely intellectually lazy. They don't do any research, and then their ego is bound up in the idea that they're receiving information through non-traditional means, and so they don't want to question any of it. They want to believe it all, because if they have to question one aspect of it, then maybe all of the rest of it's not true. So that's, really something to take into consideration too, if you're like reading channeled material, that a person may stumble upon something legitimately once, and then all the rest of it is just ego and drivel. So quick recap, eat to support brain health, exercise, sleep right, good health is absolutely essential. Intellectual laziness, emotional healing, got to heal your traumas. If you are able to engage in ritual magic practices like the LBRP, that's really going to help to accelerate your process. Responsible use of entheogens also, and intellectual activities. Objectivity, developing objectivity and neutrality. I think that's it, guys. So do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon. Do your pranayama. For mind and body alike, there is no purgative like pranayama. For mind and body alike, there is no purgative like pranayama. Pranayama, pranayama, pranayama. For mind and body alike, there is no purgative like pranayama, 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 pranayama. Everybody have a good night, and I'll see you again soon.